At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
Dès ma première rencontre avec M. Nehru, Delhi et à Chandigarh,
how from being a totally dusty plain, Chandigarh is now covered with greenery.
City must grow. It must be given a direction.
Hello and welcome to the story of Chandigarh, a podcast about how the modernist city of Chandigarh came into being and what its future might look like. This is Ishan Shafla, and with me is Dr. Vikramaditya Prakash. In this episode, we explore the monuments of the capital complex, their meanings, functions, and origins. We critique the symbolism of the open hand and its present-day transformation as a symbol. We also briefly discuss the mythical status of Chandigarh in the architectural imagination. Thanks for joining in again. Today, let's talk about the monuments of the capital complex, which would mark an end to a long series of episodes about the capital complex. So from what I've seen or tried to find, there's very little literature around the monuments. It's usually a very short footnote, or even in your own books, it's like part of the discussion around the door or as like a very small paragraph. And even in the Oeuvre Complète, very little written about it. Do you think this goes to show how they were sort of add-ons that were trying to fill in the empty spaces or a bit of an afterthought?
That's a really good question. And a nice astute observation. You're right. They're sort of cryptic and unfully explained. At one point, I think in the Marg article that Corbusier wrote, he said that Jane Drew one day asked me, Corbusier, why don't you make some symbols of your preoccupations? And I decided to make the monuments. And he just put it that much. But he doesn't really explain them much. So you're right.
I believe there are like 6 of them. Is there a definitive list?
I think there's 5 or 6 of them. So what are they? They are, of course, the big one is the open hand monument.
Is that one of them? Okay.
That is one of them. That is one of them. Oh.
And
then Tower of Shadows.
Yeah.
Then 24 solar hours.
That would be the artificial hill.
Artificial hill. That's right. Then the Martyr's monument with the ramp.
Yeah.
And then there is supposed to be a modular, which I don't think has been built.
Where does that go?
I don't know exactly where does it go. I think it's supposed to go on the other side of the plaza, opposite from Tower of Shadows, behind the Martyr's monument, toward close to the assembly, somewhere there. And I think that's the same monument that is constructed in the Le Corbusier Center in sector
19.
I think that was supposed to go to the capital complex.
I see. And I believe the Martyr's Memorial itself is incomplete. There's like monuments or like sculptures that were part of the composition that were never built.
Yeah. They're supposed to be like detritus, like ruins at the foot of the Martyr's Monument, which is supposed to be like a broken column and a broken wheel and things like that.
And I think a modular man like laying down.
Yeah, maybe there is
That's
like
part
a
of
figure. Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, the modular man lying down. Yeah, I haven't really studied that. I mean, the Martyr's Monument is a very cryptic monument.
But that one, I guess, kind of makes clear by the naming of it what it's supposed to mean. But he also writes that the ramp is supposed to get you act like a promenade and give you like a complete view of the capital once you're sort of elevated.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, I think the origin of the Martyr's Monument, I think I remember reading in some conversation, some correspondence, that there was this conversation about marking the partition and the people who died or something like that, vaguely. Right. And so the martyrs, martyrs of what? It has to be partition because this was designed in the 1950s, early 50s.
Yeah.
So it was part of the making of Chandigarh. So I think it's connected definitely to that. But I think with the ramp and this unmade broken column, etc., I think Corbusier also sees it as history, as the martyrdom of history and the sacrifice of history and the end of history, sort of.
Right. I see. As sort of testament to the vision of Chandigarh moving on from the past.
The unfettering.
Right.
I just made that connection to Nehru, but I think also in Corbusier's modernism, it was the unfettering from history.
That's also noteworthy in the context of Chandigarh not having monuments in the rest of the city.
A good point. Not having statues.
Statues. That's right.
No people figures.
Or even named streets, for that matter.
Or even named streets. So both these were modernist moves by Corbusier to say that, we are not going to do it the way we used to do it. Make things after supposedly glorified people.
So he only wanted himself glorified.
I suppose this could be called Le Corbusier Nagar, no?
Yeah.
Le Corbusier Garh.
Or at least the capital. Yeah.
The capital should be renamed Le Corbusier Garh. And Rock Garden should be renamed Nek Chand Garh. Because that is a garh, it's a fort.
Yeah, that's right. The Tower of Shadows and the artificial hill seem to me to be complete, right?
Yeah, those are complete, and those two are connected. They're, as you know, physically also connected by the ramp that goes into the trench. And that was there also represented very heavily on the door, the assembly door, where, the 24 solar hours, day and night, and then how the seasons change, was the Corbusier's whole concept of the briese-soleil, that architecture is a system of mediating the elements, the weather.
Right.
And then you also use that to create a moving sculpture, basically. For him, the design of the briese-soleil was not just a technical thing, but it was also a way of making clothing for the building, which is to say making fashion for the body of the building, which gave expression to the building. So as the shadows move, they were expressive of the building. So they were a continuation of the free facade. So in Villa Savoye, you don't need solar protection, right? So he just has strip windows because it's cold Paris, outside Paris. But here he needs the solar protection, and then he makes the elevation out of this. But elevation is a poor word. But for him, it was like a three-dimensional sculpture of the moving of light and shadow. So that was sort of the baseline. Like A, it's protection. B, it's like making a three-dimensional sculpture in the form of a clothing for the building, right? Exterior facade.
Yeah.
And third, he had this sort of mystical, not mystical, I would say cosmological belief that that we are all subservient to the cosmos, which in our case, the determinants are the sun and weather and the movement of the earth around the sun. So he's like, we're not subservient to Jesus Christ or God anymore, but we have to remember that we are more subservient to the cosmos.
Didn't he say that the light coming in from the assembly paraboloid was
the roof,
was supposed to remind the governor that he's the son of the sun?
Oh, yeah. No, that's a good reference. No, but not the light coming in from the roof of the sun. That every session of the assembly was supposed to start by opening the ceremonial door of the assembly.
Right.
To remind them that he is son of the sun. Yeah. And I think the light from the roof of the assembly hyperparaboloid also, both were designed to remember the son of the sun. And then on the roof of the assembly, he made all those solar symbols, borrowed from Jantar Mantar, which is a ode to the cosmos.
Right.
He tried to make basically some kind of a modernist religion out of the sun and the earth's movement around the sun as the governing system of our life.
All of the buildings are also kind of hinting at the cosmos, but the monuments probably most in extreme fashion, or like most clearly.
Most clearly, but they still take interpretation, because if you look at the Tower of Shadows and you look at the 24 solar hours, you feel, well, okay, he's showing you how the briese-soleil principle works, and that's a simple scientific principle, better explained by diagram. And, 24 solar hours, why do you need to make such a huge, big geometric hill just to say there is day and night? Everybody knows there is day and night.
Yeah.
So by making monuments out of them, I think This was part of his sort of derivation from the Nehruvian worldview, where he called the dams the temples of modern India. So part of that project, Corbusier was making these monuments as the kind of shrines of his belief system.
Right. Do you think he ever had a program in mind for at least these two, the Tower of Shadows or the artificial hill? Because artificial hill does imply some sort of occupation or people laying down on its side, don't you think?
Yeah, you're right. It does imply that. Why do we need a ramp going down? I think the ramp was there. I don't think there was any program because these are basically follies. They are in the tradition of follies, like from the Victorian gardens or the Chinese, Japanese gardens, and of course, more recently, the follies by Chumi in Parc de la Villette and things like that.
Yeah.
So they're functionless things. I think that ramp is simply there for maintenance so that you can get down and, cut the grass and do things.
Yeah. But they never take you there on the tours. They're kind of off limits.
Really?
That ramp.
Why?
Yeah. I just remember I was going down one of the trips and the guy was like, "Oh, there's snakes down there." And it's like
Maybe there
the grass was not kind of trimmed and it's not very well kept, that lower area, because it's not accessible.
Yeah. Well, it'd be fun to, because we used to go down there earlier and climb all the way up the geometric hills. I have fantastic panoramic views from on top of the geometric hills.
Of both sides, I guess.
Of both sides. Yeah. So
I just remember in Rome they have this kind of hill on the Tiber. I think it's called Isola Tiberina. It's like right in the middle. There's an island next to.
On the Tiber, in the middle of the Tiber.
Yeah, it's connected by two little bridges. So people in the summer go there and just sit on the slope.
Sunbathing.
Sunbathing, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I imagined this would be used like if there were to be a program.
Yeah. That makes sense. But you remember earlier we talked about the roof of the assembly, and that has a stage which has never been used, which is supposed to be used for solar festivals.
Right.
So, we have to invent new solar festivals. I think AP House should take on the task of inventing, at least designing and publishing, details of new solar festivals that should be held on the roof of the Capitol complex, of the roof of the assembly, even if they are done or not.
Right.
Like, what would that solar festival be?
Yeah. I think you mentioned this before, but yeah, very abstract in terms of describing kind of activities, I think intentionally.
It's trying to say we have to invent new modernist rituals, new modernist festivals.
Do you think in the abstraction of all these, let's say, monuments, he was keeping that spirit of open-endedness and ambiguity in the future of the capital? So the monuments fit into that narrative of unfinished business.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think they would fit into that open-endedness and incompleteness of the capital as direction indicators, as signposts, where to head while charting unknown times and unknown territories. It's like, what do you hold on to when you are sort of making your way through times which are unknown? I think that would be their purpose as direction indicators, which is, explicitly the purpose, as he wrote it, of the open hand.
Is it?
Yeah, it's also sort of a direction indicator. He said it turns in the wind. He said it turns in the wind not to show, I think he said something like not to show the vagary of ideas, but the direction of the wind, like because wind keeps changing direction. It can be unpredictable, right? And you need to have a compass. It's this old nautical imagery from when crossing the Atlantic, without GPS, right? You had to, wind would keep changing direction. So you had to be able to keep compass and orientation to make it across. And I think for him, all these monuments were those compasses and astrolabes, that would keep pointing you, telling you which is the right direction.
But also architecturally, in the space of the capital, they do some sort of distance maneuvering in the sense that they give you the illusion of it being more compact than it is. Maybe by bounding it from the sides a little bit, giving it more of a piazza. feel. And by being, like you said, markers of space, they diminish the long stretch of land between the High Court and the Assembly.
That's right. They work functionally as mileposts along the way.
Yeah.
And they certainly do. The Martyr's Monument on one hand and the Tower of Shadow on the other side together kind of create a neck, a constriction in the path, right? This, that you, as you move from the Assembly to the High Court, you have to pass between these two and then cross over the bridge, which of the road that goes underneath to the governor's palace. So there's a kind of a constriction there, kind of a neck, a gullet between those two structures. So they articulate the space a little bit without kind of bounding it as you might think as a piazza would be properly.
But maybe they accentuate the cubist reading of it by being peripheral objects that sort of distract you momentarily and reframe the buildings, you know, so that it's not just like, you know, three massive monumental buildings.
Yeah, I think you're completely right about that, because that is exactly how follies are supposed to work. Like they help you orient your view, not by framing them literally in a frame, but by sort of producing disturbances in sort of expected sightlines. So that makes sense. That's a good observation.
Although follies in Chumi's example, for instance, they have a very regular sort of format and dimension.
Yeah, but you really think follies, like the follies in when we, remember we went to the Katsura Imperial Villa, the way the tea houses work as you move through the garden, right?
Right.
That's a classic folly. Those are the original follies. The concept of the folly in the British romantic gardens, British and French romantic gardens, like Sans Souci and what's the other one from the late 18th and early 19th century, stroll gardens that the British designed were derived from Chinese and Japanese gardens. So instead of tea houses, they would put, pavilions, belvederes, with ionic columns and things like that. So Chumi's follies are laid out in a grid, so in fact, they don't work as follies at all. They're sort of abstracted in that sense. Unfortunately, they have a different kind of very intellectualized reading.
Did people climb up the Tower of Shadows in your time, since you were doing all sorts of things in the capital?
No, we never tried to climb up the Tower of Shadows. It didn't seem interesting. But we did ride the motorcycles and scooters up the ramp of the Martyr's Monument.
Oh, wow. And take off from there, or just
No. Once I almost went down on the other side. I was like so scared. But at night we were on scooters riding our motorcycles up the Martyr's Monument. And then we used to go and drink beer on the Martyr's Monument. Just sit over there, legs dangling, drinking beer, wondering what Corbusier was thinking.
That's probably what he intended. Should be done there.
Yeah.
Well, that's. I mean, I would love to see some documentation, photography, if they exist, because we've seen cricket being played inside the open hand pit.
Yeah. I don't know if I have any documentation of those shenanigans. Yeah, that's good.
Also, in the open hand, there was supposed to be an acoustic shell behind the speaker's podium.
Right. So we should talk about the open hand now. So the open hand is very interesting. That was his big commitment to Chandigarh, that he proposed that this monument be built. And for him, the open hand was a symbol of, it has many things in history. If you look at the history books, if you look at his sketchbooks, it originated actually out of a sketch he was making of 4 women sitting on a beach.
Oh, yeah.
4 women, and he sort of said, oh, this looks like a hand, and he made it into a hand. And then he was designing a monument for, I think, a Czech or some kind of a socialist Soviet, Valiant Coutier, some kind of a hero of the socialist side, and he had a big hand in it. So it had all these sort of monumental qualities to it. And then, of course, he designed it also as kind of like in the shape of a bird, a kind of a dove. But this final form of the hand with 3 fingers and held together and one separate and the thumb separate, this was a symbol of putting up your hand, like putting up your hand to say, I want me, I want to be counted. And what Corbusier was saying over here was it was in part he himself saying, I am putting up my hand. And he was saying Chandigarh is like the putting up of a hand of alternative, different thinking. And officially, and he said it's a symbol of what he called the second machine age. He said that the first machine age, which is industrialization, machine age is industrialization. He said the first machine age gave us a lot of goods and standardization and the ability to produce as much as we need for everyone. But unfortunately, because it was yoked to consumer capitalism, the distribution of goods became unequal. And he said the second machine age should be about free flow of goods, open to receive and open to give. That's what the open hand comes from.
So very socialist in a sense.
It's sort of a socialist vision, but he wanted to also distance himself from socialism or communism or Russia. So it's a socialist vision, which is why when Jawaharlal Nehru, together with Nasser, Tito, and Sukarno and others in 1955 at the Bandung conference in Indonesia, made the non-aligned movement, right?
During the Cold War.
During the Cold War. Non-alignment as neither being communist nor being capitalist. Corbusier wrote to Nehru and he said, that's what the open hand is about. It's independent thinking, neither communist nor capitalist, but freely borrowing from capitalist and communist thinking,
right,
from those worlds, industrialization and so on, but doing it in their own way, doing it in one's own way with a vision about a future. So if Corbusier ever articulated a sort of a clear vision about the future, after his early visions about the future, in 1920s, he made the Villa Contemporaine and Radiant City and so on, like complete utopian visions.
When he wrote the book Towards a New Architecture, right?
Yeah, Towards a New Architecture, which originally in French was Vers une architecture, or Towards a architecture. In English, it was made Towards a New Architecture. But he made the Contemporary City also as a book. And then later on, he wrote the Trois Human Establishments, which Yuli Chowdhury translated.
And he had this magazine, didn't he? L'Esprit Nouveau.
L'Esprit Nouveau was not his magazine, but he contributed to it. Yeah, I think Aux Enfants was the editor of that. But here in Chandigarh, by the end of his life, he was not making, blueprints of utopia. He was putting out ideas, which is that the industrial age should be based on free flow of goods. Get things to whoever needs them and not have them held down by ownership.
Right.
And the other idea in open hand was the end of war. That, of course, he was coming out of two big wars, World War I and World War II. He said that the modern world is able to live peacefully. And his formula was if everybody had equal and good access to goods, then we would live peacefully. So it's a utopian vision in that sense. But that was, if one wants a statement of political commitment or his ethics about life, or his ethic for what he hoped something like a modernist way of living would be, and that's articulated there in the open hand.
I want to bring up this book that we were discussing the other day. The Chandigarh is in India.
Oh, yes, yes.
Edited by Shane Javeri. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
In the context of, the open hand being, neither this nor that, and the non-aligned movement, neither capitalist nor socialist. And I mean, this book, in a sense, points in a similar direction by referencing a lot of work that is only peripherally connected to modernist thinking or modernism, and takes it as a point of departure. So it sets itself up, the book, in opposition to other narratives around Chandigarh, which usually take the form of, East versus West, or did Chandigarh fail or succeed?
Right.
So I don't know, I just liked it as a sort of critical approach to addressing Chandigarh, or even, moving beyond
Yeah.
it as a critique.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a great initiative by Chanay. I'm not sure he took it anywhere else though, but
2016.
yeah, as a critique of Chandigarh as non-Indian was the standard postmodernist sort of critique, which led into the idea that therefore Chandigarh is Euro-Western and therefore the Chandigarh furniture is genre and Western heritage.
Wow.
It's all just, that's all just such nonsense. So,
Yeah.
I mean, and that is sort of, the new idea that I'm proposing, is to think about modernism as a non-aligned modernism. The idea of modernism that is sidesteps these dualities of Western, non-Western, Eastern, Western, first world, third world, without universalizing them, not in the name of something that is universal and therefore transcendent, but something that is nevertheless not identifiable by a certain ultimately mythologized locality. So it's a powerful idea, and I think it has a lot of possibility.
That modernism doesn't belong to anyone. It's
Doesn't belong to
global.
anyone, but it doesn't not, it's not, that doesn't belong to anyone, not because it is universal, but because its modus operandi is situationist in one sense. A situationist in the situationists of the 60s, in your Italian situationist sense, but also a situationist in the Gita sense. You can read Krishna's Updesh to Arjun. To do Karmanyevadhikaras, there's also a situationist reading. So non-ultimate epistemologies, there are no 10 commandments in Gita or in a situationist thinking. So situationist thinking, there are no 10, 5 points of architecture either. That's modernism is not about 5 points. Modernism is about constant, but independent thinking. It's, you've got to always keep thinking and critiquing. You have to critique and critique. That includes self-critique.
Going back to the open hand, the citizens of Chandigarh would be retrospectively very glad that it exists as a symbol of the city, like the Eiffel Tower or the Statue of Liberty, let's say.
Yeah.
I mean, those stand in for whole countries, but in the context of Chandigarh, it's a very, let's say, ubiquitous symbol, right from souvenirs to government paperwork. So,
well, that's right.
It's
Yeah,
everywhere.
I mean, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. That's the thing about symbols, particularly sort of follies or sort of unanchored symbols, like the open hand and Eiffel Tower and so on, is that they become graphics, and very effective graphics, and they're the symbol of Chandigarh. It's everywhere.
Do you think it does the opposite of its intended purpose by being so, let's say, abundant and everywhere, that it loses or gets hollowed out in terms of meaning?
Yeah, it totally gets hollowed out for sure in terms of its historical moorings, which is also, like for instance, the Le Corbusier Foundation in Paris has also the open hand as its symbol, which is sort of insane. It's the symbol of Chandigarh, but the non-aligned movement.
So it's also a symbol of Corbusier in a sense.
That's what they're saying.
That's like the Swiss 10 franc.
Yeah, it is. It is. So, but what you're saying, this is one of the uncontrollable properties of symbols, is that they can be appropriated and transformed no matter what the symbol. It's like the third world, The third world was made as a non-aligned movement term, because it used to be the Cold War was a two-world theory. You either joined the communist world or the capitalist world. And Nehru and company said, no, we are going to make a third world. But only post-colonial countries joined the non-aligned movement. So third world became a term meaning poor countries.
Yeah.
So this is one of the problems with the signification, is that words change meaning and often go even opposite to their original intention. So it is a problem. So for instance, the trench at the bottom of the open hand has two sets of seats, right? Two seating areas.
Yeah.
And those are supposed to indicate 2 points of view to everything. That was his basic point. Okay, everything has 2 points of view. Nothing is settled. And through the podium and through conversation, by taking turns and speaking, which is also the sort of the idea of democracy, you've got to constantly rethink things. Yeah. So nothing is settled. So a project for the AP House would be to run a conversation in the open hand on the meaning of the open hand.
That's a good one.
Yeah, once you talk about the open hand in the open hand, that makes complete sense to me.
I'm surprised that hasn't been done. What happened at the convention that happened at the open hand?
Well, earlier, before that, we held an event in 1995 in the open hand for the Theatres of Decolonization Conference. We held events in the Corbusier buildings in the museum. We had held events in the Rock Garden. We held events in the open hand, before all the clambering down came down. We held events in all these.
Who's we?
We meaning I was running this conference with Jaspreet Thakur and Kultar Nath and John Bill.
And this is the one where Spivak was speaking?
Spivak came, Gayatri Spivak spoke, Alan Cahoon spoke, B.V. Doshi spoke, and A.D. Anthony King spoke.
Wow. Is there documentation? Were the lectures transcribed?
Yes. They were all transcribed. Yeah, Theatres of Decolonization, Volume 1, Volume 2 proceedings. So one could imagine a Theatres of Decolonization 2.0. Now that decolonization has become a big term.
Yeah. So you were kind of way ahead of your time.
Yeah, that suggests to me that maybe we should do a Theatres of Decolonization reissue of a selected set of essays from there. Yeah.
It's not a bad idea.
That's not a bad
With
idea.
the new preface and
and all that. Yes. That's a really good idea.
I think because it was so early, a lot of people might not have might have missed that. At least younger audiences.
Yeah, I'm sure they did.
You could expand this concept of monuments to across the city. Like if we were being, sort of open with it. There's foundation stones in several places. There's monuments at the lake, like the bandstand, etc. There's the signboards of Chandigarh kind of have an iconic silhouette.
Yeah.
And the cave-like drawings scattered across the capital entrance of the CCA.
The entrance of the CCA, those my father, of course, Aditya Prakash put in, but in the very much the Corbusier manner. Yeah, and then M.N. Sharma designed the two monuments in Sector 17. One with the bird in the main plaza of Neelam Plaza, and then the one in front of the library.
With the tall kind of ceramic-cladded abstract form, yeah. There's a maquette of that at the information center, I think, before the Capitol. Yeah. There's a third one, which I don't know anything about. There's like 3 spheres, also in 17.
Oh, yeah. I think that's right. I think that also is from the same time. That's also M.N. Sharma.
But yeah, I mean, the bird in particular is indicative that the Indian architects were impressed by this logic of monuments that are abstract in nature and wanted to continue that across the city.
Yes. I mean, Sharma, for all his failings, was a dedicated modernist Jhandawala. He carried the flag sort of as a true soldier, loyal soldier. He was not a critique. He was not a critical soldier, a critical thinker. But he certainly was a loyal soldier, which is interesting given the fact that Genre and Corbusier both really didn't want him to be chief architect. They wanted Prabhavalkar to be chief architect after Genre. Nevertheless, M.N. Sharma turned out to be very, very loyal. So it's a lucky thing for the city. Anyway, that's a separate conversation. But in terms of monuments, I mean, to round this out, what do you think about the monuments as a group in the capital ones?
I think they're a very intriguing body of work collectively, and they sort of keep you engaged in the promenade. And this, in a sense, complete it and point in a lot of other directions. And I think they do a job of sort of, maybe not demystifying, but showcasing the sort of ethos of the capital in its allegiance to the cosmos and its instruments isolated, like the ramp isolated and the briese-soleil isolated, make it sort of very clear the tools and the processes involved at large throughout the city.
Yeah, intriguing is right. Intriguing is right in the sense that they have a clear kind of content, yet at the same time, they have a sort of a quizzical, opaque quality to them, like, oh, what's going on? So on the one hand, they are very obvious. On the other hand, they are sort of like, and in that sense, they are also, I suppose, belong to the register in which the painting on the interior of the assembly door is on the outside, there's a landscape, right? On the inside, nobody knows what the hell is going on.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that it's sort of about the creative process, but
the
very
creative
little
process.
is known.
Yes, that's right. Which, Corbusier said, artists never tell. You don't explain the creative process.
That's why it's on the back.
So it's on the back. It's sort of secret.
It's like a magician and his tricks.
Yes, right.
But still, even if you make it to the back, which I mean, when you're on the inside, it's very hard to tell what's going on there.
That's
Cryptic.
right. Yes, it's very hard to read. So they're cryptic and intriguing and designed to make you ask the question, what are these about? And then they start you on an answer, but then hope that you will just continue the journey yourself and ask yourself, what do I think about my relationship to the cosmos?
This, what you just said, also kind of embodies the experience of Chandigarh, because it occupies a very mystical, let's say mythological place in people's imaginations, especially in the West. But even after you visited Chandigarh, if you've done that, that doesn't cease. I mean, there's still that enigmatic, that opaqueness, that's not quite clear or, obvious what it's all about.
Right. Yes, that's right. The Capitol complex and some of those buildings, though, the problem is the sort of standardized, modernist facades of the public buildings, and the markets are the one that sort of have the lasting image on the ordinary, everyday person's visual imagination. So the more intriguing qualities of the Chandigarh architecture kind of lost to esotericism, such as in our conversations and the books on Corbusier. For the everyday person, open hand is just a symbol, and maybe it connects to Indira Gandhi's Congress party.
Possibly, yeah.
Which was a later coincidence.
Thanks for listening to the story of Chandigarh. This is your host and producer, Ishan Jafla. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email us at storyofchandigarh@gmail.com. We'll continue our conversation in the next episode. Until then, this is the story of Chandigarh.